He's perhaps best known as a professor for an entire generation of Russian musicians, but he was a composer in his own right. I'm the Classical Nerd, and today we're talking about Anton Arensky. Anton Arensky was born into a wealthy musical family in 1861. Little is known of his personal life because he would grow to be an incredibly private person, but what we do know is that as a young boy he was encouraged in his musical studies, and he composed many pieces as a kid. When he was 18, he began studying music officially under the tutelage of Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, who at that point was well on his way to becoming the dean of Russian Musical Academia. He went straight through school in St. Petersburg, and he ended up with a teaching post at the other Russian Conservatory in Moscow. His high scores in St. Petersburg helped him to become the youngest professor ever hired at the Moscow Conservatory. Arensky's 13 years teaching at the conservatory saw him teach a great many students, including the famous class that included Sergei Rachmaninoff and Alexander Scriabin. He loved Rachmaninoff when he was a student, and thought that Scriabin was just too pompous and arrogant and full of himself. He retired in order to focus on his pieces, and he indeed worked on some large-scale pieces, but they were met with mixed reception. The truth is, as a composer, Arensky's works just don't stand out in the way that a lot of other famous Russian musicians do. Tchaikovsky is often cited as a big influence, and indeed Arensky's most famous piece is a piece called Variations on a Theme of Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky and Arensky were both seen as lyrical composers, although Tchaikovsky was seen as someone who had a greater gift for melody. Arensky's main problem was that he was great at the miniature, that was really his wheelhouse, but he was less than adept at actually translating that into large forms. Some critics have even pointed out his tendency to give material in his symphonic works to the cello section, which isn't a bad sound at all, but, mix it up a little bit, dude. Despite his involvement in academia, he was well respected by Mali Balakirov, who, as ringleader of the so-called Mighty Handful, had actively shunned academia within Russian music. Balakirov was even instrumental in securing Arensky the post of music director at the Imperial Choir, one of the cushiest jobs in Russia if you could get it. Arensky directed the choir for 6 years before retiring from that post at the age of 40. Arensky had more than enough money to live on, and he intended to retire in peace to work on his music. But within 4 years he was dead. He had moved to a sanatorium in Finland in order to help his tuberculosis, but the disease got the better of him. When Rimsky-Korsakov heard the news, he was saddened but not altogether surprised. Rimsky in his time was known to be a bit of a partier, hard drinker and inveterate gambler, and it's likely that his activities doing this kind of thing suppressed his immune system enough to eventually kill him. It's unfortunate that Rimsky's appraisal of the situation is really the extent of what we know about who he was as a person. There's very little to go on when it comes to his personal life just because he never wanted to share it with anyone, and no evidence has come to light as scholars have probed his life. Rimsky-Korsakov went on to say that he thought Arensky's music would be quickly forgotten. This was at best a self-fulfilling prophecy in the years to come. Arensky composed a decent amount of sacred music, which would seemingly put him at odds with the apparently irresolute lifestyle which he led, but this is music history and you would be surprised.